So making a stand is one of the 12 signature projects that LEEDS 2023 are doing as part of the Year of Culture. This is a piece that's been commissioned by artist Michael Pinsky and Studio Bark.
It represents the bringing back of the old forest of LEEDS. So basically taking the forest back and bringing it back into centre LEEDS.
LEEDS is the original forest where LEEDS City Centre was actually built upon. So the artist wanted to sort of recreate the forest inside the city centre.
The project is an installation of 127 fins across City Square in the centre of Leeds.
To really engage people, art needs to be provocative. So there's this kind of careful balance that I try and play in my art between a certain idea of beauty, but a certain idea of confrontation as well. And with making a stand, it's like this piece has landed from outer space.
So these trees have been felled in Hereford and around that area, processed in a sawmill local to that, and then brought back to the workshops at stage 1. We spent a bit of time there doing as much installation work or as much prep work as we can before we come to site. Then we're doing the last little bits here and fitting them as we go.
LEEDS 23 is about new designers and sustainability, which this project reflects massively.
The ethos of this art project gets to the heart of our ethos, which is, as a hardwood sawmill, sustainability.
So we've been documenting the process from start to finish. It's one of the rare opportunities where we get to see the raw materials coming directly from source.
There's a greater demand for hardwood and timber in construction currently because sustainability is much more in the news and in people's consciousness. And part of that sustainability improves not only carbon capture, but it also improves the biodiversity and the ecology of all our native woodlands and countryside. I mean, our ethos as a sawmill and our owners as a charity is to try and encourage people that using timber is a sustainable material.
This is something that's become really important to me. And in this case, we've looked at the supply chain of wood itself. And that's why we've taken the wood at a very early stage in the supply chain. And for this artwork, we're borrowing from the supply chain. So we're taking that moment, and rather than it sitting on its own in a warehouse or in some lumber yard somewhere, we're erecting it vertically in a public space and allowing people to see that process. But it's really important, it's a key concept for this work, is that we're only borrowing these materials and we're making sure that we can put them back into the supply chain.
The brief was quite a tight brief because the scale of the individual planks that are required for the artwork is the only timber we could really foresee that coming out of was overstood Douglas fir. Typically Douglas fir is ready to harvest 40 to 45 years when it becomes viable for a landowner to selectively forest or clear fell for a replanting scheme. But the timber that we're cutting for this project is got to be at least 60 years old to get the girth and the dimensions that work within this particular brief. There's 3 or 4 parcels that we've selected the timber from, and they've been planted from the years 1959 to 1962. So they've been growing for a long time. But once we've felled them, we have to make sure that they achieve the right strength grade. So we're having to select every tree based on its rate of growth and the amount of knots within each plank. Chainsaws are the sound of increased carbon capture, helping with the climate change. It's a good thing.
Some of the difficulties getting the project to where it's been has been sourcing the timber. Because it's a natural product, working out the structural calculations for it has been very difficult.
Early on, there was a few design iterations, a few changes to how we were going to do things, which came about when we started thinking about how it was actually going to work in real life.
Every fin that's built within this structure, 127 of them, has been given an exact specific location based on the measurements we've taken of it and the strength that gives to the structure. So it's been a little bit different to a normal steel assembly where we can just work something out in advance and then every component is the same. Throughout all of this, it's all an individual piece.
So it started off with just renders, drawings, concept ideas basically from the designers who then commissioned us to engineer it. So I've basically taken their drawings and put it into my CAD world where I've built it from the ground up basically. I've had to position all the fins, make sure all the brackets work with each other, all the bracing, all the wires. It's been a long process, but it's been good. They've been cut from single trees of Douglas fir, and they've had to be this size so that the grading will work, so that it'll actually stand up and hold itself.
Processing all the different pieces of timber throughout the workshops has been quite tricky. Because they're all individually placed within this, getting everything in order for when we get to site has been absolutely critical. So as we're lifting them, we're taking them out of a stack, they've been processed and layered for when we get to site. So it's as efficient as we can be on site.
I've been the one who's taken the design from the designers and made it work in real life. It's sort of like the stepping stone from just a concept to this.
So we've worked with Stage 1 since November on this project, helped us develop the design, make sure the design stands up to the test of time and weather. So it's actually worked out really well in terms of working with Stage 1 and the communication we've had with Stage 1 and the development of the structure to make sure it's all safe and also meets the expectations of the artists.
Throughout the whole site, it's about 24 metres square. We've got about 0.8 of a metre deviation from one side to the other. So we've had the whole site mapped and we've worked out in advance the height of every single fin. So as each fin's going into its location, it's already cut to height. And as you look across the top of the structure, we've got a beautifully flat line across the whole thing.
So the planks of wood are designed to be the forest of Leodis, and they've been specifically placed so the angle of them look right from all directions and you get a different view from all directions. Primarily for the approach views from the oncoming roads. They are positioned so we allow access for disabilities to come through in wheelchairs, and they've also sort of been designed to withstand the onslaught of the modern British weather.
This grid of the fins has superimposed itself on the existing architecture in the square, and that produces a kind of certain frisson and a certain moment where you reappraise the surroundings you're in.
The project's mainly to do with sustainability and how we're going to go ahead and reuse all of this stuff after we've had it up here for a few months.
So the idea of the timber used for this project has almost been like a catch and release on the supply chain. The idea being that as much of the components we've used can go back out into the supply chain as possible. So there's been the bare minimum of treatment to these. So once we're finished with them, once the artwork is dismantled, it can be reprocessed and it's not a waste of materials.
So we can start creating nice recreational spaces, but also creating good product that can be turned into artworks that's sequestering carbon.
It's striking to us who have been the ones who've seen it all the way through. So I think seeing it from nothing is quite impressive.
This structure will be here from the middle of June through to the end of December 2023.
And it will be left alone really for the public to interact with and make their own way through it.
This work gives a kind of new vision or new optic in which we can see the square, and having these fins here slows that process down and allows them to reappraise what they're seeing, the everyday things that they're seeing.